Get involved to fight climate change. Come make we engage to fight climate change. Get involved. Too much carbon dioxide a release. I contribute to climate change. Severe weather and strong hurricanes. Out the season rainfall and the place turn river like jokes. And it make the temperature hotter. We have to use up the sun, the wind and rivers to get cheaper and better energy. Plant more trees, preserve the forest, practice proper disposal of garbage. European Union and Jamaica are partnering for a sustainable future.
Welcome to the European Union delegation to Jamaica's panel discussion on climate change. The theme is Towards a Culture of Climate Resilience for Sustainable Development. I'm Archibald Gordon, and I will be moderating the panels. Our first segment will highlight the existential threat of climate change in various sectors critical to our sustainable development. Our expert panelists will explore why climate change is an issue for Jamaica using relatable, practical, and concrete examples to deepen the understanding of participants about the issue of climate change and why climate change action is critical for our future. Joining us for our first discussion are Denton Alvaranga. He's a member of the Morant and Crofts Hill Farmers Group project. Dr. Teresa Rodriguez Moody is Chief Executive Officer of the Jamaica Environment Trust, and Professor Tanisha Stevenson is Head of the Department of Physics in the Faculty of Science and Technology at the University of the West Indies, Mona. Ladies and gentlemen, and gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
I want to start with you, Dr. Stevenson, by just talking about, Professor Stevenson, by explaining what is climate change.
So when we speak of climate change, we're speaking of changes in measures of the climate, your rainfall, your temperature, your wind. These are changes that last for decades and longer, and they're changes that we can attribute to our own activities, the burning of fossil fuels, the oil, your gas, your coal, or deforestation, or approaches to energy and transportation, for example.
And climate change is one of those controversial issues because there are a lot of people who say climate change, you know, it's a figment of our imagination, but there are in fact places which living things can no longer live in.
Absolutely. Especially for us in the region, climate change represents a lived experience, so we don't have that luxury. But something coming out of recent assessments from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, as a group of scientists coming together to assess the state of knowledge of climate change. Every inhabitable region on this planet is experiencing some form of climate change. And so nowhere on this planet is there a luxury to suggest that climate change is not real.
And you have been, you know, in a particular position to be able to speak to this because you're a lead author on that United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 6th Assessment Report, and also working as a co-director of the Climate Studies Group at the University of the West Indies, Mona. And in 2020, you produced a report that talks about some of those areas that you're talking about, and I want to go through them. First is this issue of rainfall, and the report says that the Caribbean as a whole will gradually dry through the end of the century. Why is this an issue?
So remember, for us, water availability is crucial, water security, water quality. And so when we look at climate change projections, we use computer models to help us to understand what are the possible future outcomes on our climate. And what we notice is that rainfall, we have seen a drying trend likely to emerge as we approach the end of century, already emerging right now into the end of century. That has implications for water. We're seeing increased temperatures. So already, Archibald, we can speak to climate change that's already observed. Higher temperatures, more extreme temperatures, more intense hurricanes and more frequent hurricanes coming through our area. We can speak to hotter oceans, warmer sea surface temperatures. All of these are patterns in the climate change that we're already experiencing. And the computer models we use suggest that it's only going to intensify as we move into the future.
If we use rainfall as an example of that, according to the projections, the 2030s will be 4% drier, 2050s will be up to 9% drier, and at the end of the century, up to 21% drier. And I want to talk about the impact on various sectors, because just to bring in Dr. Rodriguez-Moody here, this has an impact on a range of different sectors in the country. What's the impact?
So the sectors that we're concerned about would be agriculture, tourism, forestry, water sector, but also health, right? And remember, water is one of those that it affects everything. And so any sector that depends on water quality, water availability, is going to be impacted greatly.
One of those sectors is farming, and that's an area in particular, and agriculture, that JET is particularly concerned about. Why are you so concerned?
Food security, you know, that's something that we have to be concerned about. If we are not able to produce our own food, we are going to become reliant on imported food. And it's not just Jamaica that is experiencing these issues related to climate change. As Professor Stevenson said, all countries are being affected. And what we're seeing also at the global scale right now with the events occurring are that countries want to focus on their own market, to protect their own market and feed their own people before they export. And so this is a concern as we start to convert our lands to other things for tourism, for housing, that agricultural lands are being lost but are also being impacted by the lack of water, the increased temperatures and so forth.
No, there's a sense in which we seem to think this is something that's far off, but Denton Alvaranga, this is something that you are seeing in your area already. What are some of the things that you're seeing?
Sir, this is very important, you know, because Jamaica is an agricultural country, where 20% of its workforce is engaged in agriculture. Critical. And we have some 245,000 registered farmers in Jamaica. So I want us to look at it, at the devastating impact that climate change can have or is having on the farming sector. Now in Clarendon, North Central Clarendon there, the Morant Crosshill area, farmers are feeling, they are experiencing the effect of climate change. Normally, this area used to have a lot of tree crops, permanent crops, your coffee, your cocoa, your citrus, your banana, sugarcane. Now, a lot of these crops are on the decline for a number of years now. And that certainly has impacted the livelihood of many farmers. Many of these farmers here, which, well, basically this area falls within the Rimina watershed area, have very steep slopes. And most of these farmers have been working on the hillsides. And as a result of that, we have seen quite a bit of deforestation, where farmers, you know, have also cleared lands to establish crops and for burning for fuel. You know, we have also seen a lot of erosion, you know, based on the farming practices, the bad farming practices that the farmers employ within this area. You know, we have seen that. Also, the rivers, right now, the rivers, the water source is very, very low. The rivers, the Pinders River, the Thomas River, the Rio Minho, very, very low.
You've seen less rain than ever before, according to you.
That is correct. That's correct. And erosion is rampant. You know, so these are some of the effects that we see there. Right now, there's drought. Well, not drought, a dry spell within that area right now, dry spell, which certainly is having an impact as it relates to food security. Very, very much so, because normally, you see, 80% of our farmers in Jamaica depend on rainfall to do their farming. And once there's a decrease in that rainfall, and right now we have two planting seasons in Jamaica, the spring and the fall. We are in the middle of the spring planting season now. And I can assure you, sir, that we are nowhere near what we had expected to plant or to establish in respect of crops. You know, and also the crops that have been established, they are struggling, they are suffering. Drought is on them. You know, they will not be able to achieve their optimal. Their optimum, certainly not. You know, the yields will be low. I can say that. So certainly there's an implication for national food security.
No, I want to talk about some of the issues that you raised a moment ago, but I'll get to them just in a moment in terms of some of the strategies that are being taken to actually address this issue, because it is important for us to understand that even as this is an important challenge, there are strategies that are taking place.
Sure.
But I just want to set the context of the climate change discussion a second by going back to you for a second, Dr. Stevenson, to talk about the impact. The second issue that was raised by the group is about air temperatures, and the finding is that the Caribbean as a whole will gradually warm through to the end of the century.
Right.
When you look at the percentages on the, you know, it says a mean temperature increase from about 0.48 to 0.56, 0.86 to 1.6 to 1.5 degrees Celsius by the 2050s. Doesn't sound like a lot, is it?
It doesn't sound like a lot, but we have to understand our context as well. A number of things to consider. Our globe has warmed about 1.1 degrees Celsius. What that has already meant for us are more intense extremes. It has meant hotter temperatures for sea level rise, which has implications for water as well because of coastal flooding. Has implications as well when storms come through and we have additional flooding. Already we're seeing the impact of a 1.1 degrees Celsius. So any increase in temperature will mean for us, especially as small islands, greater impact on our lives and livelihoods. So as we see our temperatures increasing, we can't neglect the impact of this increase. Secondly, yes, even in our local context, Jamaica is recording an increased temperature. This has implications for energy. Already, if I ask any of us what's happening at the nights, we're running fans and ACs because it's just hotter. It has implications for thermal comfort. It has implications for our energy. Check your bill at the end of this month. It has implications for productivity, not only for your plants, but your animals, reduce productivity under higher temperatures. So as our temperatures increase, heat stress, we have security persons, we have farmers working in the sun. What's the implication for them as they work under these temperatures? So as you look across the scope of our lives and livelihoods as a country, this has intense implications, as well as for health, as well as for tourism. You're selling a product, but you're not selling a product for persons to come and experience thermal discomfort. So it just has implications across all our livelihoods and the choices we are making.
You're also seeing those implications and also concerned about those implications as well, Dr. Rodriguez-Moody.
Yes, of course. It's very concerning, especially like in the urban centers, when we are seeing a lot of the green spaces being removed, and we focus on increased development of these spaces. We're removing the trees which play an important role in cooling, not just cooling, but it does play an important role in cooling, and we're removing all of this and creating all of these concrete spaces which heat up the urban centers even more. We haven't seemed to be, I don't think we're taking enough of that into consideration as we develop.
Yes, just want to make a point here back on national food security. Presently, as a country, our annual food import bill stands around $1 billion US, and it has been so for a number of years now. However, there are certain areas in which, as a nation, we are food secure. There are certain crop groups that we are fairly comfortable in. Our vegetables, our fruits, our condiments, our roots and tubers, our sorrel, we are pretty food secure with those. Where we are in a spot of bother is with our cereals and our legumes. Our cereals, that's our corn, because we know that all the corn that goes into animal feed is imported. The corn, the wheat, the rice. All of that is imported. So a lot of our food import bill goes there. Also, our legumes, we are in serious problems there. 80% of the red peas we consume now is imported. And other legumes are also imported, like your gungo peas, cowpeas, broad beans, and so on. So those two areas, we are not secure there.
Particularly when you talk about some of the ones you raised earlier, corn, wheat, and rice.
Yes.
Those are major staples. People eat
correct.
them.
That's correct.
Large quantities.
Right. So, I mean, if the impact, if we should have continued to have this negative impact, you know, of climate change on our crops, you know, who knows what might happen down the line. It is quite possible that these areas in which we are now secure, the time might come when we will not be that secure. I think that's a point that we have to bear in mind.
Dr. Stevenson, I want to pick up on that point that you raised earlier about sea level rise. Because again, when you hear the percentages, when you see the numbers, for a lot of people, they look at it and they're like, you know, is this really a huge impact?
It is. I think to note about sea level rise is when we look at the pattern since about 1901 to about 2018, we have seen about a 1.3, just over 1 millimeter per year rise. Doesn't sound much. What the science is showing us is as we look at decades, like between 2006 to 2018, the rate of increase is heightening. That is to say, we are accelerating in sea level rise, the rate of sea level rise. It doesn't look like much, but just pass through health shot and you see the impact on lives and livelihoods. We no longer have access there. And other coastal areas across our region.
Beach disappearing.
Absolutely.
Places
when
which
the
used to be now in the middle of the sea.
Absolutely. When storms come through, the amount of coastal flooding we experience is increasing because of that incremental sea level rise. If we look at coastal flooding, again, the instances of coastal flooding is increasing. So it does not look like much, but it impacts on us. We look at water and any kind of reservoirs we have near the coast, where we have saltwater intrusion. And so again, it's going to impact on water quality. And I think to note about climate change, we can talk about the higher temperatures and then less rainfall and then sea level rise, but all of this is hitting us one time. We're talking about a compounding impact. And then you're talking about urbanization, you're talking about poor agricultural practices in some cases. When all of that comes together, it is causing a great challenge for us in the region, especially among small islands, not just for the Caribbean, but in other areas as well.
Sea level rise also one of those areas that Jet is concerned about.
Yeah, you know, what Prof. Stevenson spoke about is the fact that you have that vertical rise. But if you have low topography, fairly flat land, it also means that there's a horizontal. It can get further inland. So that's also, so they have that increase there, but you also mean that you're covering more of that coastal area under normal circumstances. So when you develop along the coastline, and as you know, Jamaica has a lot of coastal development, not only in tourism, but in coastal infrastructure. When you develop along the coastline, what that means is that you have less space, less of that zone of protection. And I don't think many people understand that a beach, a coastline, it's dynamic. Beaches are dynamic. So today I might go and I might say, whoa, this is a massive stretch of beautiful sand, but check it in summer or check it in winter and it changes. And what happens is we tend to build in these zones, lock in the sand which is necessary for that movement to leave that beach dynamic. And we have these problems. So our policy, for example, our existing setback policy, is it adequate? Has it adequately considered the fact that climate change projections, they've been constantly revised in more recent times with scientists have a better grasp and understanding of what this means. Has those policies moved with that? So existing now, I think, is a setback of about 30.5 meters. Is that adequate? We already have a lot of developments, especially in areas like Negril, that are in breach of some of that setback. And what this means is that you have the likelihood of intense damage with the more intense hurricanes, the more powerful storms, that damage to our GDP, both at the macro level and then at the local level to the, you know, the different the smaller developments or infrastructure that's there, that's going to be massive, and it's just going to compound and increase as time goes on.
Mr. Avaranga, you wanted to raise a point.
Yeah, just to bring up that point, the plains of Veer. Now, those plains used to be in sugarcane to a large degree. Over time, we have realized that some of those soils have become saline. Mm-hmm. And if you should go there now...
Salty.
Exactly so. Mm-hmm. Pretty salty. And as a result of that, the production of sugarcane has gradually declined.
So even something that people might, at the top of their head, think has no impact on agriculture does in fact have an impact on farming.
That's correct. And sometimes even the wells, you know, when wells are dug, because, you know, the wells are dug to get water, to irrigate the sugarcane lands. And even when the wells are dug, sometimes they can't be used. Saline.
We're close to the end of this discussion, but I want to raise one more point, and then I want to talk about some of the work that is being done. The final point I wanted to raise, Dr. Stevenson, is in relation to hurricanes. Mm-hmm. We've seen some of the evidence of that, but we're also, it says there's no change or a slight decrease in the frequency of hurricanes, but a shift towards stronger storms as we go along. Yes.
So already in Caribbean memory, we can think of our Irma, Maria. We can think of how rapidly they developed and how slowly they moved. And we can just look at a region on what the impact has been for Caribbean people. On top of that, consider projections that we're going to have more intense storms. Frequency, when we look at the future, there isn't a lot of agreement, may have decreased, may remain same, but intensity. And just to consider intensity alone with greater rainfall rates and stronger winds, that has huge implications for us and our preparations in light of storms that may come through the area. So this is not something we can ignore as a region, and as we plan, as we develop, as we build, we have to consider these risks that are increasing with climate change.
And that also has a challenge or presents problems, I would say, for farmers. And the EU project, and I want to bring you back here, Mr. Alvaranga, there's a focus on forest protection in Jamaica as in that EU project. What's the benefit of that?
That's correct. Soil, you see, soil is so bare now, as it is. Bare, empty. Nothing to, there's no cover, or very little cover. Certainly has a negative impact on the soil, erosion, and so on. So what we find happening now is that under the forestry project, farmers have been given forestry trees, and they are establishing those now. This is a private planting program. Also, the project has that. There's also the fruit trees. Fruit trees are also being established within this general area, and other practices, you know, that farmers are being taught that instead of slashing or cutting down and burning your bush and so, you use them as barriers, log barriers, truss line barriers. You know, you use plants as vegetative barriers, you know, along the contour to conserve, you know, soil.
So those are some of the techniques.
Right, those are some of the techniques.
As we come to the close of the discussion, I just want to bring in the other two panelists here. What are some of the other steps that Jamaicans, the average person, can take?
We have to consider that we have to cut our emissions. We have to go back to the root of the problem. And so whether it is better use of energy, renewable energy technologies. So if we can get greater support for solar so that more infrastructure can have solar, water harvesting, we have to consider that as we move forward as a nation, we have to consider how we can cut our own emissions, we have to consider how we can position ourselves to respond to the changing climate, and we have to spend more time on educating ourselves about the impact of climate change.
And final word to you, Dr. Rodriguez-Moody.
We have to understand that climate change makes vulnerable groups even more vulnerable. We need to know where they are, who they are, and how we can increase their ability to adapt and to cope. Because what it means is that it's only going to put them in an even worse position, and we really need to be focusing on them as well.
So we've been talking some of the solutions in this panel. In the next panel, we'll explore even more solutions. What are some of the gaps, but what also are some of the next steps? So once again, we want to thank our panelists for this discussion. Our Professor Tanisha Stevenson, who is head of the Department of Physics in the Faculty of Science and Technology at the University of the West Indies, Mona. Dr. Teresa Rodriguez Moody is Chief Executive Officer of the Jamaica Environment Trust, and Denton Alvaranga is a member of the Morant and Crofts Hill Farmers Group. And we have laid the foundation for the next panel when we are going to be discussing climate change resilience, the gaps and the next steps, as I indicated before. But let's take a look first at the European Union delegation to Jamaica's new video, Engage to Fight Climate Change. Take a look.
Get involved to fight climate change. Come make we engage to fight climate change. Get involved. Too much carbon dioxide release a contribute to climate change. Severe weather and strong hurricanes. That season rainfall and the place turn river like jokes. And it make the temperature hotter. We have to use up the sun, the wind and rivers to get cheaper and better energy. Plant more trees, preserve the forest, practice proper disposal of garbage. European Union and Jamaica are partnering for a sustainable future.
That was the European Union delegation to Jamaica's new video, Engage to Fight Climate Change. We hope that you will join the movement to build climate change awareness and resilience in Jamaica. So our second and final panel discussion is about climate change resilience, the gaps, the next steps, and importantly, the role of partnerships as well as the general public. Now we're going to be talking about the actions being undertaken by the government of Jamaica to address this issue of climate change, and we will also be featuring areas of partnership between the European Union and Jamaica and achievements in climate adaptation, mitigation, and disaster risk reduction, as well as local and global actions for climate change. Our panelists for this segment are Professor Dale Weber, who is chairman of the Climate Change Advisory Board in Jamaica. Gillian Guthrie is Chief Technical Director in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. And Marian Van Steen is Ambassador. She is at the European Union delegation in Jamaica. I want to thank all of you for continuing this really important discussion, and I would like to start with you, Ms. Guthrie, by talking a little bit about some of the important steps that we have been taking, because in our first segment we talked a little bit about the problem, but it's important to understand that while gaps exist, we have in fact been taking some action, and I want to start by talking about the role that Jamaica has been playing. Where does climate change rank as a government priority?
Thank you very much. And I just say that for the government of Jamaica, the climate change issue and the agenda is priority number one. We believe that this particular issue is the foundation of economic growth and development and social well-being. If we don't get the climate change agenda right, then the economy will also be impacted negatively, and so will the quality of life that all Jamaicans experience. So we believe that this is something that the government has prioritized and is working assiduously to bring the population along, sensitize them to the importance to actively play a role in mitigating and adapting to climate change impacts.
So putting the climate change and sort of making climate change front and center in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation is one of those actions.
Yes.
What are some of the others?
Okay, so we are well placed in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation because not only do we have the Climate Change Division, which is very active in terms of charting the climate change agenda, but we also have the environment portfolio in the ministry. And these two portfolios work hand in glove to address the climate change impacts. For the ministry, we are responsible for policy and legislative framework, and we also do projects and programs as well to address the issues that concern all Jamaicans with respect to climate change. We have a climate change policy framework, which we are currently updating to make it align with the tenets of the Paris Agreement. We are working on what we call a low emission climate resilience strategy for Jamaica, looking at how it is that we transition to low carbon infrastructure, and how it is that we build resilience of the country to grapple with all the attendant issues related to climate change. We also have a climate change research agenda, and we are partnering with academia, the University of the West Indies, to see how it is that we prioritize research in key economic sectors. What it is that we need to do in these sectors in terms of innovation and frontally addressing issues related to climate change. So these are just some of the things we are doing. We have projects that we very kind support from the European Union, for instance, in the forestry sector that has helped us to advance the climate change agenda in Jamaica as well.
And you mentioned the European Union there, and that's where I want to go with Ambassador next, because you're a big supporter of these climate change initiatives. What are some of the actions the EU is taking in Jamaica?
Thank you very much. That's a very big question, because we're actually doing a lot together with Jamaica. And indeed, as was said before, climate change is for us as well highest priority on our agenda. We have developed something which we call the Green Deal, and everything that we do has transversely at least climate change as part of it. And when I say everything that we do, that is also including the work we do with other countries, with our friends and allies, with Jamaica. So most of our projects, if not all of our projects, will have some component which has to do with sustainability, the fight against climate change, preservation of the very rich biodiversity here in the country. But let me just say one thing. We do assist, and I can give you a list, and we do a lot of things together with the government and with civil society here in the country. But it's not only about projects. I mean, of course, it's important, but it's very important that we sit together at the multilateral level. I mean, we all know that pollution doesn't stop at the borders, and we all know that if we want to fight against this climate change, then we have to do it all together. So what is very important, that the European Union finds a very important ally in Jamaica at the multilateral level. We've seen even special recognition of the work of the Prime Minister, who was selected after the Paris Agreement as well, to kind of lobby and work together with governments and the private sector to make sure that the financing would be on the table. I think that is very important. We've also seen the commitment of the Prime Minister and, of course, the entire team, the government, Minister Samodo, to really have climate change very high on the agenda. The 3 million trees that he wishes to plant before the end of his mandate. So we do really see in Jamaica a partner in this. And then, of course, I can come in with all the projects that we are financing. There are many, and there will be more in the future. It is really our priority. The forestry sector, which has been mentioned, is one of the biggest ones. It is not us, let me tell you, it's not us coming here and saying we think that you have to, you know, work on your forestry or make your forests more sustainable, but it was the government, and the government made up a plan to make forestry more sustainable, to go against deforestation, to make sure that the local forest communities, they would actually see the opportunities that are sustainable with the forest, not burning them down, but actually using the timber in a sustainable way. So there we came in with a very big program. It's more than 16 million euros. I do not always like to mention all those big amounts of money, because it really sounds, I mean, I cannot even calculate it in Jamaican dollars. That is not the most important thing. The most important thing is how the government uses it, and what are the results. And we are very happy to see what the forestry department has been able to do with the funds thus far. So this is just one, but we are also working in agriculture to make sure that the impact of climate change, we've heard that in the panel before, which is huge on the agriculture sector, on the individual farmers, that we try to mitigate the impact, and of course to adapt to make sure that the sector is more climate resilient. And then we have more smaller projects as well to support the fish sanctuaries, for instance, really important in Oracabeza, but also in the Portland Bight protected area. So yes, we have a lot. I know very often people would like to see a figure, like how much is the European Union providing in support. I say it's difficult because many of those programs are multi-annual, so one day can be completely different than the other day, but I've done some calculations and I think we are probably having on a continuous basis projects ongoing with a worth of 25 million US dollars. So that is quite a lot. And it's going to, I mean, we're going to continue and to increase. Final point is that in the new programming cycle, we have taken the decision all over the world that when we provide bilateral assistance to a country, that 30% of that should be dedicated to the fight against climate change. So that shows and demonstrates how important this priority is for the European Union.
I see Professor Weber you're nodding your head there on that point about the importance. Why do you think that's an important point?
It's important, and thank you very much for the opportunity. It's important because it demonstrates a willingness and a commitment, but it also provides the ammunition and energy so that we can take the steps that we would always like to take. Very often we make plans, but we're unable to execute. It is through partnerships that we have the opportunity so to do, and the European Union partnership is one very strong partnership that has taken us far down the road in areas that we thought we were not going to go before. Because I don't know if you recall, when we first started the climate change discussion, it was a lot about energy, and we eventually got onto agriculture and housing. But if you talk about land use, and more than half of Jamaica's land use is still in forest, whether it is dry limestone forest, montane forest, those are areas that need special attention. And I think the EU has come with a particular focus, and we've been able to use their guidelines and their funding to forward the Jamaica agenda. And it's a really good partnership that works.
That issue of partnerships is really important. But before we get to partnerships, which I do want to talk about, I want to talk about a point that was raised by Ambassador earlier, which is this issue of what kind of action needs to be taken at the global level. And we saw a conference of parties there, the UN Climate Change Conference held in Glasgow last year, dubbed the sort of defining conference for mankind. Did it, from your perspective, live up to expectations?
I would say yes and no. So in 2015, when the Prime Minister approached the University of West Indies to ask if we would be part of an advisory board, of course we would have to say yes. Little did know we were becoming a part of a board which was going to have all academia. So it's UWI, UTEC, and Northern Caribbean University. It is public sector, private sector. It involved energy, agriculture. It is seated within the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. And the energy and the avenue through which it works is the Climate Change Division. You therefore have an opportunity to stand back, look at the big picture without being in the day-to-day enthralls. But it does give you the opportunity to advise, to take the best research. So we created 3 subcommittees, one that looks at communication, one that looks at research, and one that looks at financing, because those we think were the 3 major areas. Bring that to bear. Whenever there is a COP, a Congress of Parties, as the advisory board, we have a chance to influence not just who gets to go, but what do they go with? What ammunition are they taking? What do we provide them with? Whether it's research, communication, little taglines like 1.5 to stay alive. Those are issues that come from the Jamaican government and from the Climate Change Advisory Board and our regional partners, which help us make the right statements. So you ask, was it successful? In many ways it was. It brought together a lot of thought processes and a lot of persons who may have had different views as to how critical their contributions were. Very often we think, my little contribution can't make any difference, but you do recognize that there's so many of us with that same view, like minds. At the COP, there was a lot of small groups getting together to make one large voice. That was poor. The downside is we would have wanted more decisions. We would have wanted more to walk away with to say, as of 2030, we shall do this or we shall stop doing that. That is difficult because apart from the political agenda, there are the real economic agendas that each country has, and every country is at a different economic stage. So I would have liked to have seen more decisions, but I fully understand. And I think the part of the success is in the continuity of the discussion and the fact that no doors were closed. An appeal was made, eyes were open, but no doors were closed.
Those issues that you've raised, communication, you said research, financing, those are 3 of the gaps if we were to talk about that. Ms. Guthrie, in terms of any of those areas, what's the priority for the government?
So In fact, all three are the priority. We have to tackle all three in a very focused way. Just to say a little thing though, I think COP26 allowed us to galvanize again and to right-size the global climate agenda. We were going along a path, and we may still be, so it's left up to see whether the actions taken at COP26 will allow us now to really meet that 1.5 degrees Celsius global temperature target that we are all aspiring to. But we had a world leaders forum, and Prime Minister Holness was there. And it was another opportunity to galvanize the political momentum around that global 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature target, because we have to meet that. We are not on the trajectory now to meet it, and so it will require what we just talked about, partnerships, communication. It has to be an all hands on deck approach. It will require action at the multilateral level. It will require action at the national level. It will require action at the community level. And each individual will need to understand and appreciate what their role is in terms of mitigating and adapting to climate change. It is not them who will do it. It is us who will have to do it. And I think that is the key message that we need to get across. So the communication, we have a communication strategy for climate change that has been developed, and it's to be rolled out in earnest. The Climate Change Division has what they call uncut conversations that they do every year. And this is a time to sensitize the population and to galvanize action at the national level. And so they try as best as they can to disseminate information to the population, because climate change can be a complex matter, but it's also a real matter, because every Jamaican can understand and appreciate what the impact of climate change is on their lives.
In a very practical way.
Exactly. And so what we still need to do is to be sure that all of us are on the same page. When we are communicating the message, we understand what is our role in executing that message. The research agenda, as I said, we have a research strategy. And we are going to also rely a lot on academia, our scientific community, to help us with innovation, to help us with researching issues in priority sectors, the key economic sectors that we have, to be sure that they're climate proof and resilient. And also financing. So this is the big
That's a
issue.
big challenge.
Big challenge. And the financing is that we talked about at COP26 was at the multilateral level. This $100 billion per year, which we did not achieve, that we were supposed to achieve by 2020, so 2023, that we're to achieve this target. But also it will require the galvanizing of the financial sector at the local level, because they also have a role to play. How it is that they will help with the climate proofing of these key economic sectors on which the economy depends. So
like agriculture, like tourism.
Agriculture, tourism, health also is impacted, and the infrastructure sector also. So all of that will need to be climate proof, because the fact is that Jamaica is in a geographical space, and because of our small size, finite resources, open economy, we are vulnerable. So we will experience, if we don't, as a global community, push back on that, or try to achieve that 1.5 degrees Celsius global target, we are in serious trouble. Droughts, floods, these are the things that, and extreme weather events, and then the ability of the country to recover. So if you keep having these things coming one after the other, it is difficult for the country to recover. So we will have to put the measures in place to bring the population along, bring the key economic sectors along. And some of that has started already to climate proof and adapt to climate change, while we still do the mitigation actions that we require.
Which brings us to this key area of partnerships overall, and that's where I want to go with the discussion, Ambassador. How important are partnerships, and what are some of the practical ways that perhaps the private sector and individuals can assist? Because this is not just a them versus doing thing, as we've been saying. And actually,
I mean, I wanted to say a word about this multilateral forum, the COP, because I mean, I'm accompanied with people who are really experts, and also the panel before, but maybe people do not really know what we're doing at the multilateral level. And in those COPs, government conference of the parties. We actually bring together all the governments of the world. Of course, we will also bring in the private sector, the civil society, the youth. And the idea is that we work on 3 things. And I have heard the words, but I'll just set them out again. It's mitigation, it's adaptation, and it's financing. These are the 3 core issues that we are discussing in this multilateral annual events, the COPs, as we call them. Now, mitigation, what it is just making sure that the temperature does not rise faster. We are at 1.1
What do we do to
degree
reduce
Celsius.
what is happening now?
I mean, yes, above what we, what is our target. Our target is not to go to have more than 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures. We're at 1.1. That is pretty dramatic. So we're all sitting together and we ask all the countries and we try to, find this ambition and this commitment to really mitigate, emit less, etc., etc. So that's one thing. And in the Paris Agreement, we actually agreed not to go beyond 1.5, if at all possible. So that's one thing. The other thing has to do with adaptation. We see that small island developing states like Jamaica disproportionately suffer from extreme weather conditions. So we have to make sure that the world prepares, that Jamaica prepares itself to these extreme weather conditions. It can be hurricanes, but it can be the increase of the sea level. It can be any kind of change in our climate. So adaptation is really important. And then, of course, financing, you mentioned that. There was the objective to reach, indeed, funds amounting to $100 billion a year that the international community would put together in order to fight against climate change. And indeed, we have not made the target, so that's not good news. I think we reached around 80 billion a year, and now the target has moved to 2023. And the idea would really be that we have this kind of solidarity, because we do know that, there are disproportionate impacts on countries who have not caused the climate change. So there is a need for solidarity and for help, and that is why the European Union is so strongly present here to assist the government in its objectives.
Can I just add to that, Ash?
Sure.
The discussion about what do we do, the government has very boldly put forward its nationally determined contributions, which is, here's what we say we want to do. Part of the communication now has to be...
As part of the global fight.
Correct. What does Jamaica need to do? What does public sector, private sector, and individuals, what do you need to do to make a difference? Now, for some developers, it is in developing a new, let's say a new housing development, you decide, I am going to make a forward step and change my water system, my sewage system, and my electrical system. There will be complete solar, etc. So there's some decisions that can be taken from each sector, whether it's agriculture, manufacturing, and even people in their individual operations can say, I want to make a difference. And that difference could be making a call, could be making their voice heard, or purchasing power. I mean, consumers do not recognize how their purchasing power influences everything in terms of manufacturing and development. If we all decided we're all going to buy from a certain type of supplier or a certain green
They'll
supplier,
make what we want.
The others are going to go out of business. But that may be a little harsh. But I think it's important that we communicate what our NDCs are, what can be done to get us there. And it may be a little scare tactic, but I think it's important to say we all go with 1.5, but what happens if we don't make 1.5? 2 is pretty scary. 2.5 is beyond our imagination, and 3 is going to be dramatic.
We're about to wrap the discussion, but I want to end it by talking a little bit about that. What can individuals do in particular segments as we talk about partnerships, so that people are clear what they can do at home?
Okay, so as Professor Weber spoke about our nationally determined contributions, these has 16 commitments in terms of its implementation, looking at different sectors. So for instance, we have what we call the Integrated Resource Plan, which talks about the electricity mix, trying to get more renewable energy investments into the country.
More solar, wind,
more solar, more wind. And a lot of that is going on now. We have Wigton Wind Farm 1, we have 2, we have some solar farms in the country. We also talked about the National Tree Planting Initiative. So we are looking for the trees as a sink, a reservoir for carbon capture. because if we don't capture this carbon, then the heat effect is what we realize. Now,
and individuals can plant more trees in their houses.
Individuals can definitely plant more trees. In fact, we're inviting them. The forestry department is practically giving away trees. Anyone
They're
who
very inexpensive, actually.
And some of them are free. So if man in the street wants to have some trees, please contact the forestry department and let it be known, and you will be able to, they'll be able to be supplied. We're also looking at, like the private sector, for instance, this changing of the street lights to LED, to changing of inefficient lamps in the schools and hospitals to more energy efficient lamps, for instance. We're looking at transitioning the national fleet. Minister Audley Shaw yesterday spoke about introduction of electric buses. This is something that we have to do to transition the transportation sector to not be so reliant on fossil fuels. Also the transitioning of the electricity sector, moving from fossil fuel-based fuel to LNG and other sources. So there's a lot of activity going on, but the individual first must educate themselves. They must be conscious of what is the impact of climate change on their life and the lives of their children. And once you understand and appreciate that, then you can move forward in your incremental little way. Each one must spread the word. Because we, as Ambassador said, it's all of us in it together. Energy conservation in the homes is something very important. Looking at inverter, as Prof said, looking at a conscious green procurement or green purchasing ethos. So you have inverter equipment in your homes, you have energy efficient lamps in your homes, yes. You actually practice turning off lights which are not necessary to be used. You have water efficiency in your homes as well. We talk about cool roofs.
Toilets which don't waste water.
Exactly. And when you're trying to buy a new car, there's no electric vehicles on the market, hybrid vehicles on the market. This may be something that you would like to take the opportunity to have as part of your contribution to reducing the impact of climate change. And also, those persons who are on the coast who don't necessarily appreciate the role of mangroves and keep cutting the mangroves. Those forest stands are important. They are very efficient at carbon capture. They're habitat for fish and other types of coastal life, but they also protect the coast from erosion, and Ambassador spoke about sea level rise. That is a reality for Jamaica.
Yes.
So we need to now take care of our coast. We are situated on the coast. So we need to make interventions on the coast in our individual ways to try to secure the coast and thereby secure our livelihoods.
We have about 30 seconds left, so Ambassador, I'm going to give you the last word on this question of partnerships and what individuals can do.
Yeah, we have to unite forces. I mean, that's obvious. I mean, it's not just all the countries of the world, but in the country, or I mean, on the entire planet, I do so fully agree that everyone, we have to change a chip here. Like, we have to wake up in the morning and think about, you know, whether we let the water running or not when we brush our teeth. I mean, these are very small things, but we need to think what we buy, how we live, what we eat, what we consume, and all of that will then go to the second level, which is the private sector, because indeed, if there is no demand for plastic bags in the supermarket, then the plastic bags will disappear. So all of that has an impact. But let me also stress, it's not only the individuals and it's not only the private sector. We've tried a lot to do all of this fight against climate change in a voluntary way, and it has not worked. So we do need the government, we do need the authorities, and we need binding rules, because otherwise, you know, we can talk a lot and we can have lots of ambitions, but it may not happen. So I really do think the role of the government is important, and I appreciate very much what the government is doing, but it is important in terms of, I mean, everything that you refer to, but also education. I think it is also a responsibility of the government to educate the people, that you know, when they go to school, when people, you know, kids grow up, that they know that they do not just throw away their little can on the street or their plastic bottle.
That government sets the direction.
So I think we all have to work together, every single person, private sector of course, but not least the government as well, to make sure that it's binding. And I will conclude by saying that as from the European Union, we have decided that indeed we have to go towards a binding package. So we have now committed ourselves to become climate neutral by 2050. But it's not just an ambition. It is really a package where all the 27 member states, they will be bound to really make sure that they reach that target. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say to end.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And that was indeed a very interesting and well-needed conversation on climate change. And we want to thank our panelists. Gillian Guthrie is Chief Technical Director in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. Marion Van Steen is Ambassador at the European Union Delegation to Jamaica. And Professor Dale Weber, who is Chairman of the Climate Change Advisory Board, Jamaica, for sharing their views. And we hope you, our viewers, have been reliably informed and will continue to engage to fight climate change. I'm Archibald Gordon. Thank you so much for watching, and take care.
Get involved to fight climate change. Come make we engage to fight climate change. Get involved. Too much carbon dioxide a release a contribute to climate change. Severe weather and strong hurricanes. Out the season rainfall and the place turn river like jokes. And it make the temperature hotter. We have to use up the sun, the wind and rivers to get cheaper and better energy. Plant more trees, preserve the forest, practice proper disposal of garbage. European Union and Jamaica are partnering for a sustainable future.
Hi everybody, my name is Jerome Smith and I'm the Principal Director of Forest Operations here at the Forestry Department. Just as encouraging everybody to come on board the National Tree Planting Initiative, particularly the My Tree Legacy promotions, where we get persons to go back to their alma mater, encourage persons to plant trees so we can learn about the importance of trees, not just for individuals, but for Jamaicans and the world on a whole. Thank you for your support.
Register your alma mater for the Forestry Department's My Tree Legacy promotion and let us highlight your contribution by submitting videos and pictures of you planting trees. Every tree counts. Plant a tree today and keep climate change away.
The Wildlife Protection Act is a piece of legislation here in Jamaica. It was enacted in 1945 that tries to look at our animals or wildlife on the island of Jamaica and try to